a ship from Bollinger last year, I think.
So right before I left,
Okay, I think we're ready to go. All right, can we just these two gentlemen settle in and we'll get started.
Ask some great questions. And I'll take notes on
All right, I think we'll get about started. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning from Washington to those watching online, and welcome to the Korea Economic Institute. My name is Andy Hong, and I'm the program officer here at KEI, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to All Hands on Deck, Korea's strategic role in revitalizing U.S. shipbuilding. To give some background ahead of this event, those of us with an eye on Korea or on shipbuilding as an industry in general has been aware of Korean shipbuilding prowess as a maritime industrial giant on the world stage. The U.S.-Korea angle recently really came to the forefront when then Secretary of the Navy Carlos Del Toro visited Korean shipyards in February of 2024, and the flurry of discussions on future strategic cooperation to inject new life into this dormant U.S. industry. Of course, capstone last year with the announcement and approval of Hanwha Ocean's purchase of Philly Shipyard in Philadelphia. And despite political turbulence and transition, the topic of shipbuilding cooperation has nevertheless remained this mainstay of U.S.-ROK bilateral discussions. And to that end, we have had somewhat of a shipbuilding month here at KEI. Earlier this month, we welcomed retired Navy Captain Steve Brock, who is the former senior advisor to SecNav Del Toro, to speak with us for a recorded interview on shipbuilding as a part of our Eye on Korea series, which you can also find on our YouTube channel for those watching online. We also have several articles on the topic by my colleague and co-organizer of the event, Tom Ramage, as well as by non-resident fellow Terrence Matsuo. I believe both are gracing us with their presence today. And of course, I too had the chance to contribute to this growing body of work on the Peninsula blog on our website at keia.org. And to keep up this tempo, we have two distinguished guests here today to add greater color and context to this important and growing sector of U.S.-Korea bilateral cooperation. Colin Graybow is the Assistant Director of the Herbert H. Stiefel Center for Trade Policy Studies at the Cato Institute, where he specializes in domestic forms of trade protectionism, such as the Jones Act, which I'm sure we'll cover today, and the U.S. Sugar Program, among other items. Michael Vigiano is the Director of Government Relations for Defense with Hanwha USA Corporate Affairs, where he navigates Hanwha's engagements with Congress, the executive branch, and the U.S. military. I see a pretty full house here today. I'm sure we'll be able to provide ample time for engagement with the audience, both in person and online. We'll be passing around an audience mic when it comes time for audience Q&A. And of course, for our virtual audience, please don't hesitate to leave your questions in the chat box below. Colin, Michael, thank you again for your time, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. So just to start with a scene setter, Colin, I want to cover where we're at today. So where do you see U.S. shipbuilding today? What areas do you think need improvement, which I'm sure will be tied into where we see it today? And what are some areas you think especially require allied input?
Well, Andy, first I'd like to thank you for putting together this event and thank the Korea Economic Institute for inviting me. Thanks to all of you for coming out to hold this very, I think, timely discussion. So the state of U.S. shipbuilding, I think you could describe it as depressed, discouraging, dismal, pick your negative adjective. It's not just me that says this. I mean, the Wall Street Journal, I think 2-3 weeks ago, had an article that referred to U.S. commercial shipbuilding as tiny and rusty. Last month, the GAO released a report that described the state of U.S. Commercial shipbuilding as, I think, a near crisis existence. And the numbers bear this out. It's not hard to understand why people talk like this. 2023, the most recent year for which statistics are available, UNCTAD showed that U.S. commercial shipbuilding accounted for 0.1% of global output. That's not an anomaly. Over the last 10 years, the high water mark has been, I think, 0.53%, and the low water mark has been 0.05%. So obviously, this puts us way behind China, Japan, Korea. I mean, this puts us behind the likes of, I think, Croatia in recent years. I think last 2023 we're about roughly on par with Iran. So this is where we're at. And it's not hard to understand why. Just look at the state of U.S. competitiveness. It's abysmal. U.S.-built ships are far more costly than those built overseas and take a lot longer to deliver. Look at recent examples. So currently, the only 3 container ships in order from U.S. shipyards from Hanwha. 3 ships ordered November 2022 from Matson. The current price, according to Matson's latest annual report, is $334.5 million apiece. According to the Wall Street Journal, in China, that's about a $55 million ship. According to Lloyd's List, that's about a $60 million ship in China. So we're looking at 5.5 to 6x difference in cost. The last 2 container ships built in the U.S., built by Seatrium down in Texas, those cost over $225 million apiece. Meanwhile, a similar size ship was delivered in Korea in 2023 for I think, $41 million. Not exact comparisons because the U.S. built was LNG powered and the Korean one was not. But still, I mean, this is a vast difference. According to the CEO of Overseas Shipholding Group, the current price to build a U.S. medium-range tanker is somewhere between $200 and $250 million. In China, that's a $45 million tanker. In Korea, $50, $52 million, something like that. So again, we see this recurring theme of 4, 5, 6x deltas. And it's not just the price, it's also the time to delivery. Those 2 container ships built by down in Texas, delivered in 2022, 2023. They were ordered in 2017, originally scheduled for delivery in 2020. The Matson ships, those were, again, ordered in November 2022. First one scheduled for delivery, last I checked, Q2 of 2027. The second 2 in 2028. This is a recurring theme in U.S. shipbuilding, long delivery times. So we've gotten to a place where there just isn't a great deal of appetite for U.S.-built ships. So people are doing whatever they can to avoid building here in the U.S. The only people that order U.S.-built ships are those that have to under the Jones Act, under its requirements. But even then, they do whatever they can to avoid it. I'm thinking in particular of Pasha Hawaii that operates in the Hawaii trade lane. They recently took a ship built in 1980, steam-powered. It's built December 1980. It's just turned 44 years old. Internationally, that ship would have been scrapped a long time ago. They took it to China and got it repowered to LNG, spent tens of millions of dollars. I know they spent tens of millions of dollars because Matson did the same thing for a 21-year-old ship. And according to the annual report, it cost them $72 million to do that. So we're spending tens of millions of dollars to keep an old ship running for many years to come because that apparently makes more economic sense than ordering from a U.S. shipyard. Overseas Shipholding Group, they've taken, I think, 4 of their tankers that are roughly 20 years of age. A 20-year-old crude oil tanker internationally, that's a candidate for scrapping in the near future. And they just spent tens of millions of dollars to repower them, new engines, various service life extensions. So again, this is a recurring theme. I think the last 17 Jones Act ships scrapped had an average age of 43. Internationally, ships are used 20 to 30 years, so people do whatever they can to avoid using U.S.-built ships. Yeah, it's not great. As far as where we need help, I think it's pretty much across the board. But let's also keep in mind that U.S. shipyards already make extensive use of foreign shipyard capabilities. The designs are foreign. Most of the components that go in the ships are foreign. The engine, the propeller, the anchor, all kinds of cranes is foreign. And foreign ownership, of course, is not new. It's great that Hanwha invested in Philly Shipyard, but they bought it from another foreign owner, so that's not new. Seatrium down in Texas is Singaporean-owned, Austal's Australian-owned, Fincantieri is Italian-owned. So I welcome foreign investment. I think it's useful, but I think it has its limitations, and I don't see a near-term turnaround, absent some major changes in U.S. policy, which we can discuss later.
Thank you for that scene setting, Colin. It seems the only way is up. Start low, and we can start building things up. And Michael, actually, this leads into bringing the angle a bit to Korea and the future prospects. In President Trump's first bilateral conversation with South Korea, shipbuilding was mentioned, and then recently, then acting President Choi's interview with the Wall Street Journal, he also mentioned that shipbuilding cooperation will be high priority. So it really does seem like there is a great focus on attracting Korean shipbuilders. So I guess the first part of that question is why Korea? And the second part, to bring a little bit of context from Colin's presentation just now, attracting these Korean shipbuilders to the United States has the assumption that we'll also be importing their success. And so, what are some key elements of success in Hanwha's case that we are hoping to replicate in the United States, in Philadelphia and beyond?
Yeah, first off, thanks, Andy, for the invitation, and thanks to the Korean Economic Institute for putting on this event. I think Colin gave a good overview of where we are. At the same time, I do think part of what drove Hanwha's interest in investment in the U.S. is we do see the U.S. at kind of an inflection point. There's a significant amount of interest in Congress, in the administration, and I think in industry that we've gotten to a point where we do have to make some pretty significant and potentially transformational changes on terms of how the industry operates. And that does start on the commercial shipbuilding side. Even though defense is in my title, in the last 7 months I've been with Hanwha, a lot of it has focused on the commercial shipbuilding side, and I think we'll get into today why that is and the benefits it has for Navy shipbuilding and national security. Why Korea? Korea is one of the 3 largest shipbuilders in the world. For some context, our Hanwha Ocean Yard in Ongoja Island, Philly, on average, does about a ship to 3 ships, depending on the ship mix per year, depending on the year. The Hanwha Ocean Yard is at about 40 a year. And so we're not talking small ships. We are talking large, some of the largest, most advanced LNG carriers specifically in the world. And so what can Korea bring? I don't think it's about Korea as a specific country. It is the production capability. It is the workforce expertise. It is both the shipbuilding and shipyard technologies that money has been put in, investments have been made in Korea, both by the government and by industry, into making them world-class shipyards. I don't think that is going to solve the industry problem, and I think we'll talk about the incentive structure that exists in the United States and maybe changes that need to be there, but that is areas where Hanwha believes we can bring something via Philly and future investments in the U.S. shipbuilding industrial base. We wouldn't be here, we would not have made the investment if we did not see potential, and so I think we're really looking forward to what Congress does, what the administration does. We've seen some good early signs with the establishment of a shipbuilding office in the Office of the President, as well as the new Maritime Directorate at the National Security Council. And so we're looking to bring, like I said, that dual use model, the idea where commercial shipbuilding provides a base of business and then naval is on top of that. You've probably seen in the press a lot of focus on Hanwha's interests in the naval realm. I think that can be a bit misleading at times in the sense that we are not abandoning the commercial business at Philly. Its history is as a commercial yard, and moving into the future, we see significant portions of the business being commercial, and that actually that commercial business can help address, with enough of a demand signal, the challenges we see in U.S. shipbuilding, which is workforce consistency and incentive to invest in infrastructure and technologies. you can even out some of the challenges that we'll talk about, I think, on the Navy side. And so production capability, robotic welding, smart shipyard technologies, those are the areas where we think we can bring something to Philly and be additive to the industrial base and hopefully see that standard start to spread throughout the industry as a whole.
I think you bring up some really interesting points, and I actually wanted to follow up on a bit of that and Colin, get a sense of what you think, bringing these kinds of new, not just the investment, but these kind of new innovative, whether it's methods, workforce, technology, what that can do to help assuage some of that, the two items that you highlighted as a big challenge, which are cost and timeline. What realistically we can hope to see in that front.
Yeah, again, while I welcome this kind of investment, I think it can only be positive for the U.S. shipbuilding industry. I'm skeptical about, I think we should temper our expectations about how much this can achieve. A couple of reasons for that. First, look at the existing challenges. Okay, I already laid out the cost. In fact, we're starting way behind the 8 ball in terms of we need to try to reduce that delta between U.S. and foreign shipbuilding costs. But look at the obstacles to get there. As already mentioned, there are existing labor challenges. That's not unique to Philly Shipyard. It's something they've highlighted. It's been a recurring theme in their annual reports. But this is just a theme across the U.S. shipbuilding industry. The recent GAO report I referenced mentioned the fact that shipyards are competing with the likes of Uber and fast food restaurants for workers because that's considered, yeah, you make a few dollars more at the shipyard, but work in an air-conditioned environment, with nicer hours has its attractions as well. So we're struggling with that. We're in a mood or a place where I don't think there's a great appetite to open the spigot more to immigration. Traditionally, shipyards, especially along the Gulf Coast, have used a lot of immigrant labor, but it seems we're tamping down on that. So how we're going to address that is an open question. You have, if you want to set up in the U.S., extended supply chains. As I mentioned, a lot of the materials and components that are used in U.S.-built ships come from Asia. That adds to costs. You also look at steel. I mean, steel is a huge input, and we're in the process of jacking up the price of steel through steel tariffs. So you're going to pay inflated prices for steel. I think if you want to solve the workforce, a lot of people have talked about the need to raise pay, which, yeah, that'll attract workers, but it's also, that's going to make you less competitive on the world market. We have issues like aging infrastructure, lack of technology, all that needs investment. That's not going to be cheap. The reason that they can do that in Korea and stay on the cutting edge is because, again, they're building 40 ships a year. When you're building 1, 2, 3 ships a year, I mean, Philly can do 1 to 3. The U.S. industry as a whole over the last 25 years has built about 3 ships per year, all U.S. shipyards combined. This decade, we're on track to have less than 1 delivered per year. I'm talking strictly commercial ships, so I'm not counting the national multi-mission security vessels being built, at Philly, but purely, commercial cargo ships. I mean, this year we're going to deliver 0. Last year was 0. The year before that was 1. 1 before that, 0 before that, 1 in 2020. You look at the outlook, you basically have the 3 ships at Philly plus a rock installation vessel. That's a 1 down Bollinger, I think, for EULA. So not a lot. So I think the obstacles are significant. And I think the counter argument to what I'm saying is, okay, Colin, but this is going to be different. I mean, we're bringing in Koreans. These guys are the best, and they are. And that kind of investment and know-how can play a key role in turning this around. And I guess my skepticism comes from a place that we've tried this before. The late 90s, Philly Shipyard was purchased. The U.S. government and the state and local governments spent hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies to try to bring that shipyard up to par. To world-class standards. It was placed under foreign management. Acre, which at the time was, I think, the 4th biggest shipyard group in the world. And the logic was, let's get them up to par, put them under excellent management, and they will be competitive. And as of 2019, Philly was delivering 3,600 TEU box ships that cost 5 times the world price, and they lost money on that. So this is not a great place. I think the only way I see a real turnaround is you're going to need spending subsidies, mandated use of U.S. ships to the extent that I'm not sure Congress is willing to do. It's going to require some significant resources to turn that around, and I don't want to prognosticate whether that'll happen or not, but that's what it will take. So absent that, it's hard for me to envision a turnaround.
Actually, Colin, I think you mentioned items like steel and just these broader systemic challenges. I think you touched on an excellent point that we've been also looking at, and I'd actually like to direct this question to either of you. But to us, shipbuilding almost seems like a top of the pyramid kind of item in an industrial ecosystem, where you have all these supporting supply chains and different raw materials and it all goes into the nation's shipyards in order to produce, these ocean-going vessels. Directed to either Michael or Colin, how much can we expect really, a replication of Korea's success? I think you mentioned, in Korea, where they have a lot of these underlying industrial infrastructure undergirding their very successful shipbuilding industry. How much can we realistically replicate that in the United States, and what would it take for us to replicate that success?
Yeah, I'll take a first hack at that. I think to Colin's point, when Hanwha came and made the decision to invest in Philly Shipyard, we did understand it's going to mean more than just investing in the shipyard and in the workforce. We've had experience with Q-Cells down in Georgia in the United States, with our Land Systems Australian Center of Excellence in Australia, with having to onboard our global and Korean supply chain to a domestic situation. But there will be challenges. I think this gets to some of what Colin was just talking about. Candidly, Hanwha coming in is not a cure-all. It is not the silver bullet that's going to solve the industry. It is going to take government action. Fortunately, again, I talked about an inflection point earlier. I think you saw both under the previous administration, Trump 1, and now where the president has made clear his policies lie, that the need to reindustrialize, reshore, onshore, whatever word you want to use, is the flavor of the day in the United States. It's always challenging to get those kind of transformational policies across the finish line, as I think Colin alluded to. But what I can say is Hanwha is ready as a partner with the U.S. government, with the rest of industry. If the conditions are right, we do think we have technology, we do think we have workforce experience. Again, Colin alluded to it. When you do 40 ships a year, the accrual of expertise and production capabilities to your workforce is much more significant than when you're doing a ship a year potentially for the entire industry, even if you have the capacity to do more. And so we're looking at creative solutions to address that from a supply chain perspective, from a steel perspective, onshore and design capabilities. But some of that is going to have to be enabled by U.S. government policy. I think in a lot of industries, the use case for the United States, the value play, is not we win the absolute race to the bottom cost competition. It is that we will provide you the best capability in the world, or near the best, at a competitive price with the benefit of it coming from the United States. We're not there right now in this industry, and it's going to take a combination of policy and industry also rethinking how it does certain things to meet in the middle and get us to that point. There are a lot of obstacles, but again, I'm encouraged, and I think it kind of speaks to the company's level of where they see things going, that they made the investment, that we're looking to make multiples of our investment on CapEx, that we do think there's a good possibility to see success with the industry moving forward. But there are a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles, and I think some of them have been laid out pretty clearly today.
I think you make a great point that in many ways shipbuilding is kind of the top of that pyramid, in the sense that shipbuilding relies on so many other industries, and there's a huge supply chain for it. And in Korea, in Japan, in China, East Asia, you have these industrial clusters where you need the steel. The steel mill's not that far away. And in Korea, you have plenty of steel made there. You can get it from China, not that far away. The engines are manufactured close by, so that's a big advantage. In the U.S., you don't have that. Again, we're bringing in the engines from South Korea. Not only the engines, but I remember hearing an executive at Philly Shipyard a couple of years ago saying they will bring in technicians from Korea to do the installations of the engines in Philly. And that makes sense, because if you're only building one ship a year, you're going to have people on staff that do just engine installations? No, you're going to do the guys that do installations all the time. They're the best at it. So again, that's an obstacle, and it's this chicken and egg thing. Well, you want to be competitive, you need to have that supplier base. But unless you're building a lot, you're not going to get the supplier base. But you're not going to get the supplier base if you're not building a lot, and that's a
I just
hard
want
thing.
to add one thing.
Yeah.
I think getting at, you need a clear demand signal. It is a chicken or the egg problem, and I think getting that clear demand signal, at least early on in what we'll call hopefully the maritime revitalization of the United States, you're going to need government policy. This is not something that I think industry can take on their own. We have quite a bit of data. I think Colin went into the last 20 to 30 years of it. It's not going up. And so it's going to require a change to the incentive structure from a USG policy perspective, I think, to get the industry to a point where you have the ability to make some of these changes. I think you've seen that recently with a revitalization or re-engagement with the idea of industrial-based policy in the United States that we'd abandoned somewhat for the past couple decades, and we hope to see it on the maritime side. But right now it is a hope, and we need to operationalize that both as a government and an industry.
So actually, that leads in very well to now that we've set some of the scene, now we're looking at some of these efforts that we're taking to remedy the situation from the government side. I think, Michael, you mentioned an inflection point, and Colin, you mentioned we really need, where do we start in order to really bring this industry forward to inject new life, as we discussed earlier on. So I want to focus first on some of the efforts taken by the White House and the executive branch. What are the prospects for some of these efforts, not just taken by the current Trump administration, but also in the Biden years leading up to this point where we're at now? What measures have been taken? What are the prospects for that? But also, what are ways that the federal government, so the executive branch, can maximize investment in U.S. shipyards, so make the most out of the investments that we have, but also encourage new ones. So both from the government side and what the industry would like to see.
Yeah, I'll take it off. I'll say it extends back to Trump 1, and this is obviously prior to Hanwha's ownership, but Philly Shipyard, I believe in 2017 or 2018 thereabouts, got down to as low as 80 employees, and they had no Jones Act business on the horizon. And the U.S. government correctly, I think, identified we cannot let this strategic asset fall off the board, and that is what the U.S. government needs to, my recommendation would be to take that approach to the industry as a whole. The maritime industrial base, the shipbuilding industrial base, this is a strategic asset. We are a large island disguised as part of a continent, and we are a maritime nation at our core. And in order for us, I think, to have the most effective foreign policy, economic success, you need a maritime industrial base that can support those efforts, and we've let it atrophy over the last 20 to 30 years. And so, again, I'm not going to be specific. I think the government has a variety of tools at their disposal. I'll just say the buzzword, which is demand signal. I think a lot of this is that chicken or the egg problem. If you don't have a demand signal, it is hard to keep a workforce consistently employed. If you don't have a demand signal, it's hard. If you're building a ship a year, why hire a group of people that's expertise is installing engines? If you're only doing one a year, just bring them in from outside. And so you need to have that higher demand signal, and that starts on the commercial side. It does have benefits to naval shipbuilding. A lot of the challenges on infrastructure and workforce that we see with naval shipbuilding do originate in the fact that the end of the subsidies in the 80s, the drawdown after the Cold War in the 90s, led to a shrinking of the demand signal for the broader maritime industrial base. And you had yards that became pretty much exclusively naval yards, even though they were private companies. And that has led to the challenges we see now, along with we might get into this, some of the challenges the Navy's faced from an internal process perspective. Again, we're encouraged by what we've seen in the draft EO. We're encouraged, although that's subject to change, we're encouraged by the introduction of Ships for America at the end of last Congress. We expect its reintroduction in this Congress as well. But we do need somewhat to see the U.S. government put some skin in the game in terms of committing to that revitalization, reindustrialization effort. I don't see, to Colin's point, this happening without significant changes. It's not something where we're going to innovate our way out of the problem. As much as I would love to come and say Hanwha can do that on our own, we can't. We can bring expertise, we can bring production capabilities, we can bring foreign direct investment, but the environment needs to be conditioned, and a lot of that is going to have to happen on the government side.
Yeah, so again, if you want some kind of turnaround, if you want the U.S. building large ocean-going ships, you're going to have to either require it, such as like USTR has, they float a requirement that's 5% of U.S. exports go on U.S.-built ships, or you're going to have to heavily subsidize it to the tunes of, I think, tens of billions of dollars. And whether there's the appetite for that, I have no idea. We're, of course, in a mode right now where people are concerned about the deficit, so I don't know. But let me kind of question the premise that this is a wise and good thing. So on the surface, I think a lot of people understandably think that U.S. commercial shipbuilding is important for national security reasons. But if we look across U.S. shipbuilding today, we don't see a great deal of overlap between commercial and military yards. NASSCO is kind of the exception to that. They build both Navy and commercial, although they haven't built commercial since 2020 and they have nothing on their order book that's commercial. But they're kind of the exception that proves the rule, and that the ships they build for the Navy are similar to commercial. They build, fleet oilers, expeditionary sea bases. They're built on, I think, tanker hulls. So there is an overlap there. But shipyards that build combatant ships, they don't build commercial. Bath Iron Works hasn't built a commercial ship since 1984. Huntington Ingalls hasn't tried to build, down past school hasn't tried to build commercial since the late 90s. This was Project America. They tried to build a couple cruise ships, and that went bankrupt. They sold the parts off to a German shipyard. You look at Newport News, they haven't built commercial since the mid-90s. That was the Double Eagle tanker program. They lost $300 million building 6 tankers, I think. So this is obviously electric boat. They don't build a commercial. And Philly is the #1 shipyard in terms of building commercial over the last 25 years. Built more commercial ships than anyone else. They haven't built anything for the U.S. military. So how much overlap there is. I question how much synergies you might unlock. I'm skeptical. At least I think we should scrutinize that a bit. I'll also point out that there's been an argument made that I think is at least plausible, that if we encourage more commercial shipbuilding, try to build that up, well, then you're going to create more competition for shipyard workers. And we do that at a time where the Navy yard, the shipyards that build naval combatants are struggling for workers. So is that in our interest to create more competition for these workers when we're really struggling to attract those? I think at the very least it's worth considering. So look, I work at the Cato Institute, free market guy, limited government, all that. So I'm skeptical of these interventions. I give that disclaimer. On the other hand, I very much think we absolutely have to meet our national security needs. And if there is a national security case for commercial shipbuilding, then I'm open to subsidies for that. But I think we should step back and kind of question some of the premises here and again scrutinize that a little bit more.
Yeah, if I can say something, I'll say it. I think Colin has laid out a great history of when we let commercial shipbuilding go offline. Those timelines add up. If you look at when the subsidies ended in the early 80s, that is when a lot of the major yards throughout the 80s and 90s stopped building commercial ships. I would argue that is a symptom. It is not the end conclusion. It is we let commercial shipbuilding atrophy, and it has led us to the state we are in today, which is we have naval yards that have workforce challenges. We have naval yards that lack sometimes the incentive to invest outside of their direct contracts. And so completely agree that it should be examined rigorously, but I think that examination leads to the conclusion that if you do believe the ability to build ships on time, on cost on the naval side is a national security requirement for the United States, and that reaching that future force structure the Navy has envisioned, the variety of different versions they've envisioned over the last couple of years, is a national security objective. You have to have a maritime industrial base that can support that. And right now, if you look at the Navy's 30-year shipbuilding plan, all due respect, it makes a lot of assumptions about cost overruns disappearing, schedule delays disappearing, and 46% increase on year-over-year spending every year through the mid-2050s. And so that's a conversation the U.S. government has to have internally. If you want to achieve this future force structure that you say you want, then you need to align your shipbuilding plan to do so. And then you have to identify what do you need to do that from a capacity perspective, from a workforce perspective, and decide internally, like, is this an investment that we are prepared, ready, and willing to make? And that is something I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of the broader industry, but one of the challenges on the naval side that extends, I think, in part to the lack of commercial shipbuilding over the last couple decades is you don't have a consistent demand signal. You have a legislative branch that will decide they want to cancel a program, they don't want to fund it in a given year, you're operating on a CR, and you have this inconsistent environment. It makes it very challenging as an industry to do much more than say, okay, if you want a solution, give us more money, which has been, I think, the go-to strategy for addressing challenges within the industrial base and the Navy side for the last 20 years. So I think that the timeline is right. We should examine whether there's a connection, but I would argue that there's a pretty direct connection, that if you look at when the U.S. commercial shipbuilding industry was healthy, you had a healthier naval shipbuilding industry. When the commercial shipbuilding industry started to shrink, contract for a variety of policy reasons, geopolitical reasons, and otherwise, you saw challenges come up, percolate over the years, where we are now at a point where we have the most challenging maritime industrial base situation we've had in the modern history of the United States. And so, again, I'm completely on board with you need to examine the connections between commercial shipbuilding. Does this investment make sense? I do think when you have that rigorous analysis, the answer is yes.
Actually, I'm really glad we're kind of covering some aspects of the challenges facing naval shipbuilding. I mean, previously we mentioned Captain Steve Brock's episode on Iron Korea, which, again, you can find on our YouTube channel. But there was a lot of interest, I think, from the U.S., especially to attract these foreign shipbuilders to help remedy some of these challenges we're facing on the naval shipbuilding sector. And I think we've touched on some different aspects that can help remedy that situation. I think, Michael, we've definitely heard the buzz demand signal and helping revitalizing commercial shipbuilding, and in a way trickling down to naval shipbuilding and helping, to use a pun, a tide that raises all boats. But you also mentioned earlier on some of these efforts to introduce these dual-use shipyards where, the Koreans have it, and you mentioned the Chinese also have it, where these shipyards can ideally have this capacity to build both commercial and naval vessels. And feel free to correct me on that if I had the wrong sense on that. But I'm wondering, if we're introducing these foreign shipbuilders to the U.S. To have this kind of capacity in the United States, are there any regulatory issues that they'll face in terms of, technology sensitivities or being able to transition quickly to building these naval vessels? So if we introduce, a builder that's going to be focusing on commercial shipyards, but suddenly we need to start pumping out naval combatants, will they be able to do it?
Yeah, I'll take a quick hack at that. There's a different level of standard for CFIUS when you're talking about defense versus commercial. When we went through the CFIUS process for Philly Shipyard, it was fairly smooth because the evaluation was the technology transfer was mostly going to be headed, if not entirely headed, in one direction, which was to the United States. And so it was not a challenging process. We have ambitions, I think, on the naval side that have been pretty clear publicly. We understand there's going to be, Philly's not done naval work, to Colin's point. They have engaged in kind of that quasi-governmental work with the NSMV program via MARAD. And so we have ambitions on the FCL side, and we're going to defer to the regulatory authorities within the U.S. We believe and have confidence that we can navigate that process. It's not like it hasn't been done before by foreign shipbuilders. Fincantieri has Marinette Marine up in Wisconsin. Austal is Australian-owned as Austal USA. So whether it's a proxy board or an SSA, there are ways to establish foreign shipbuilders in the United States with the U.S. subsidiary that can do defense work, including Austal working on some of our most sensitive shipbuilding programs when we're talking about the nuclear submarines.
I did want to pivot quickly to the elephants in the room, which are some of the legislative efforts that are going on. But before we get into that, I mean, we mentioned the Jones Act, and I'm sure there's nobody in the room today who has not heard of the Jones Act discussed at least once when we're talking about the challenges facing U.S. shipbuilding. So, Colin, as our resident expert here today on this particular piece of legislation, and both of you who have experience on the legislative side, we hear this piece of legislation cited as this 105-year-old dinosaur that is in the way of all that we try to do to fix American shipbuilding. Could you, for the crowd, for the record, just explain to us what it exactly is and what its role is today in U.S. shipbuilding, and how we need to approach this in terms of where does it fit in our efforts to revitalize U.S. shipbuilding moving forward?
Yeah, so for those unfamiliar, the Jones Act is Section 27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, which states that if you want to transport goods between 2 points in the United States, you have to use a vessel that's registered in the U.S., at least 75% owned by Americans, crewed by Americans, and is built in the United States. Now, this is part of the 1920 Merchant Marine Act, but this is just the latest iteration of cabotage laws that go back, you could argue, to the country's founding in 1789. One of the first acts of Congress, it allowed the use of foreign ships, but slapped a really prohibitive duty on their use. And then in 1817, we flat out prohibited foreign built ships from use in domestic trade, and it's been that way ever since. My argument is that I think that the decline of U.S. shipbuilding is, of course, multi-causal. Things are rarely monocausal. But I hold the Jones Act at least partially culpable for the state of U.S. shipbuilding. The reason I say that is because if you want to be competitive, you have to compete. And we've handed American shipyards a captive domestic market. So they've been shielded from international pressure. Between that and large Navy contracts, there hasn't been a great need for them to compete. And we also referenced earlier the subsidies that were defunded in 1981, construction differential subsidies. So they also had those. These were subsidies that basically they were designed explicitly to cover the delta between constructing in the U.S. versus foreign, up to 50%. And yeah, we built more ships back in the 70s. It was 15 to 20 ships a year, about 2% of global output, maybe 3% in a good year, something like that. But yeah, again, so my argument is that instead of the U.S. shipyards finding a competitive niche in the global market, you look across the world and you say, Turkey, they're pretty good at building tugboats. The Finns are great icebreakers. 90% of cruise ships are built in Western Europe. You can go on down the list. And U.S. shipyards really don't have one. They're kind of jack of trade, master of none. They build this kind of ship and that kind of ship in small quantities. You want to be competitive, you build large quantities and you specialize and you focus. South Korea builds 60, 70% of all LNG carriers, something like that. Very, very good. And Americans haven't developed that. Now, I am not going to argue that absent of the Jones Act, that the U.S. would be a leading shipbuilder. We'd be neck and neck with South Korea and Japan or China, something like that. But I think we'd be better than 0.1%. I think we can do better than that. I just find it unacceptable that the world's largest, most advanced economy just has such a de minimis level of shipbuilding output. And I do think if you want people to be competitive, you need to force them to compete. That's pretty axiomatic. So that's kind of how I think the Jones Act figures into this discussion. I think going forward, I support repeal of the Jones Act, but I think if we're going to be more narrow or surgical about it, I think repealing it for the domestic trades makes eminent sense to me. If you want to encourage, on the one hand, we want shipbuilding. Shipbuilding is good. It's great to have shipyards that are capable to build and repair ships. On the other hand, from a national security perspective, if hostilities commence, you want to have a large, capable fleet from the get-go. Again, look at how long it takes to build ships in the United States. I think average for a container ship is, from the time you cut steel, time you sign a contract, is 2.5 to 3 years, something like that. I'm sure in a war you could probably accelerate that somewhat, but it's not going to be a replay of World War II where we're just cranking out ships, one a week or whatever the build times were for Liberty ships. So this is a consideration we need to balance. And if we want a larger fleet, a more modern fleet, more capable fleet, we need to stop forcing people to pay 5 times the world price for ships, or we need to subsidize the bejesus out of them, basically. So,
Michael, so what's the point of view from the industry standpoint here?
Yeah, I think right now, absent the Jones Act, you would have shipbuilding fleeing the United States because of some of what Colin alluded to when we're talking about cost of labor, when you're talking about your cost in the supply chain. And so I don't think a repeal of the Jones Act is the path forward. I think that's pretty widely shared within industry. That being said, I do think, again, we're going to use the word again, demand signal, industrial-based policy. Call it a subsidy, call it the strategic commercial fleet. I come at it from a national security perspective. The U.S. is increasingly going to be an exporter of energy. I think it's critical that we be able to export those on U.S. ships and that we have full control over our ability to get our goods where we want them, when we want them, to who we want them. I don't view that just as an economic objective. I do view that as a national security objective. And so I think competition is, again, you want an internal domestic competition among shipbuilders, and I think Colin pointed out why there's a dearth of that currently, even within the domestic industry. You have kind of everyone knows what their part of the pie is, they're comfortable with that. And so I think the solution is grow the pie, expand the demand signal, provide that incentive structure for shipbuilders to invest, to innovate, to compete against each other, while still maintaining that as a domestic capability. I think the Ships for America Act represents a very creative and elegant, multiple elegant solutions in getting at that. We need a whole of government effort targeting the maritime industrial base. I think some of the leadership pieces of the Ships for America Act in terms of creating cross-agency entities that can focus on addressing this. You've seen this to have some pretty significant success both within the SIB, the submarine industrial base, and the repair efforts, the MRO capacity in the United States since 2018, 2019. The Navy decided, like, look, we have these disparate efforts that are going all across the Navy. They're not really communicating. Let's create the SIB kind of artificially, and it is now turned into the DPRM, the MIB office, Maritime Industrial Base Office. And let's take a target approach to repair. Is it where we want it to be? No. Has there been massive improvements in the last 6 years, particularly on the repair capacity side? Yes. And so I cannot stress enough, industry with the right incentive structure, and I think Hanwha believes that industry will respond, but it's going to take U.S. government action, and not one-off action, not 1 year where we decide it's a priority, but that it is a consistent priority from a resources and attention perspective for years and years, if not decades to come. It took a long time to get us to where we are and to create the problem we have. It will take, if not the same amount of time, a good while to get us back and to provide a solution.
So, Colin, I also wanted to get your thoughts. Michael, you mentioned some pieces of legislation like the SHIPS Act. I wanted to get your thoughts as well, Colin, on some of these new legislative efforts that have been coming out to help support the shipbuilding industry.
Yeah, so we have, of course, the Office of Shipbuilding. Don't know the contours of that, what exactly that means, so I'm kind of reluctant to comment on it, although just I'm kind of skeptical of the premise that all it will take is an office to turn this around. But you look at, Ships for America Act, it's, I think a pretty serious effort. And it's 300 and some pages, so there's a lot to it, but I think you could argue that kind of the central or most important element to it is the strategic commercial fleet. This is a proposed 250 ship fleet that would be subsidized by the U.S. government. They would be used in foreign trade. And if the U.S. decides that it's going to go down that route, that this is a national security imperative, that it is worthy of government resources, I think that it's one of the better approaches I've seen, in that it introduces the element of competition. They don't just take the old construction differential subsidy method and say, okay, whatever that delta is, we'll cover it, because that disincentivizes cost control. But you have to use a U.S.-built ship, and then you kind of bid your way in. You say we're willing to, it'll cost this much for us to enroll our ship in your program. So at least it introduces that element of competition to it. There are a lot of elements of the bill I totally disagree with. Like, for example, the Energizing America Shipbuilding Act has basically been folded into Ships for America Act. This is a piece of legislation that's been pushed for years by Representative Garamendi and Senator Wicker. They would mandate, I think, a certain percentage of U.S. energy exports take place on U.S.-built ships. I think this is kind of fantastical thinking. A U.S.-built, we are the world's leading exporter of LNG. Necessarily, you need LNG tankers. I mean, the GAO studied this in 2015. What will it take to build a U.S. tanker? And they figured it would take 4 to 5 years. There may be 2 shipyards that can do it. We'd have to bring over Koreans to teach us how to do it and manage the work to make sure it's done correctly. Last I checked, it would cost, back in 2019, the Wall Street Journal reported it would cost over $500 million more per vessel. This is 5-6 years ago. I mean, that delta, I would guess, is at least $700 million at this point. So, and then furthermore, I mean, we're struggling, to build container ships and tankers. The idea that we can go to some of the most complicated, sophisticated vessels out there in short order, I find implausible and misguided. So I think that, again, if we're going to go down that road, there are some elements of that bill that are worthwhile, provided also they are done in conjunction with items that I prefer. Like, okay, if we're going to subsidize U.S. shipbuilding, then let's get rid of the Jones Act, at least the U.S. build requirement, because we're already doing it through this.
Well, and of course, we hope to return specifically to the topic of legislation and some of these legislative remedies to revitalizing U.S. shipbuilding and bringing on allied support, such as from the Republic of Korea in a future event. So with both of you, we'll keep in touch, and to the audience, please do keep an eye out. And with that, I think we'll turn to the audience for some audience Q&A. I just want to remind everyone that a mic will be provided. So please just let us know your name and affiliation. And of course, to our virtual audience, please don't hesitate to leave your question in the chat box. I believe I saw Terrence up front, his hand go up first.
Hi, thank you for this discussion. It's been very interesting. My name is Terrence Matsuo. I'm a non-resident fellow here at KEI. I was just wondering if the panel could talk more about kind of the national security implications, because I think in recent years, U.S. government has intervened in favor of protecting American industries, from foreign competition. And so I guess I was wondering if the panel could kind of comment on that and how companies, particularly Korean companies, what they can do to kind of mitigate those concerns. Thank you.
I'll take it. And I think we've started down that path at Hanwha. I think the administration's posture is clear. Come invest in the United States. And that is what Hanwha has done, particularly on the shipbuilding side, but we are also exploring other investment opportunities throughout the broader shipbuilding industrial base, and on the artillery side and on the munitions side. Coming at it from my perspective, there is a national security impetus to onshore, reshore capabilities that we let kind of disperse in the aftermath of the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. I think COVID, in some ways, if there was any sort of silver lining, it was a realization of the vulnerability of our supply chains, what supply chain choke points look like, and the impacts they can have, particularly when it comes to the defense industrial base. I still think that it requires a close partnership with our allies, like the Republic of Korea, like Japan, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. But I also do think that the administration's made clear they would like to see investment in the United States. And how can we bring some of those capabilities back? There's always going to be a tension point there between investment here versus taking advantage of capabilities that already exist in some of our allies' countries. It's an all-of-the-above solution, and it's going to be a G-to-G conversation, to be frank, on where that balance falls.
I would just say I think that the administration is working at cross purposes here. On the one hand, come invest, also pay some of the world's highest steel prices. That's bad. I mean, shipbuilding, obviously, but this is bad for a range of industries. You want to build cars, machine tools, a number of industries, a lot of them use steel as an input. So again, they need to figure that out and prioritize things, because this is nonsensical from my perspective. As far as supply chains, I think my perspective is that openness actually helps promote a more reliable supply chains. We saw, for example, the baby formula crisis. We didn't have enough baby formula. Well, it turned out we were making it extremely difficult for imported formula to come in. That's why it was hard to get formula. So I think openness and just in general an open posture in terms of our trade policy can be a national security asset.
See this gentleman up front here. Right in front. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Ben Sandler. I am from the Global Taiwan Institute, and I'm just curious. You didn't touch so much on, the involvement in U.S. naval shipbuilding.
how do you perceive investment in the Philly Shipyard could lead to sophisticated involvement in shipbuilding? Is there potential for shipbuilding to occur, naval shipbuilding to occur, U.S. naval shipbuilding to occur in Korea? I know that the regulations regarding where the U.S. gets its naval ships from are tightening even more in recent years. Unless I'm mistaken, there was some legislation saying all parts, not just hulls and major components, have to be made in the United States. What's the landscape? What's the plan for Hanwha to get involved?
Yeah, I think it's been clear, and we've made clear in various public statements that our ambitions for participating and entering the naval industrial base on the shipbuilding side in the United States is part of our business plan at Hanwha Philly Shipyard. Insofar as it relates in in-theater work, I think that's a decision for the United States government on what requirements they're looking and whether they can fulfill that with work being done in Korea. I'll note that we've completed work on one maintenance, repair, and overhaul contract for the U.S. Navy, the USNS Wally Shira, and we're in process and close to completion on a second one. What I can say is I think Hanwha, and probably I'll try not to speak on behalf of industry, but Korean shipbuilding writ large is ready as a partner and an allied country to meet the needs of whatever the U.S. government decides. But that is not something that I think is up to us to decide. And I do think there's more of a case for investing in building those capabilities domestically and then leaning on our allies where appropriate. And I think that gets to some of what Colin just said about the supply chain. I don't think by all means the solution is always bring it to the United States, but in large part, I think you identify the key critical areas where do we need that capability here, or can we allow it as long as we have multiple sources abroad? And that's a USG decision that they're going to have to figure out, and a congressional decision as well.
I think Korean shipbuilding is an untapped resource in many ways for the U.S. Navy. I think that should be on the table. It should be a tool in the toolkit. It's unbelievable to me that we have some of the world's most capable shipbuilders as allies and we're not using them outside of the repair, which was phenomenal, by the way. The Wally Shira, I think they didn't have the blueprints for the rudder, and they were able to reverse engineer it in South Korea and deliver that. Pretty impressive stuff. This is not new. Other countries have used South Korean shipyards for at least non-combatants for their navies. I think the Royal Navy, the Tide-class oilers were built in Korea. I want to say $200 and some million. New Zealand, they also built a fleet oiler in South Korea. Meanwhile, we're building fleet oilers at NASCO in San Diego for $845 million a pop, something like that. But set aside cost, I also just think if you subscribe to the notion that we need more hulls in the water urgently, and you believe in the Davison window, and we're facing a looming confrontation with China, and things could go kinetic, then you want hulls in the water as fast as possible. And Senator Wicker at a recent hearing, I think the confirmation hearing for John Phelan, he said, look, we could throw $1 zillion at the U.S. Commercial industrial base, and they wouldn't get us the ships. They just don't have the capacity. So it's a numbers game. And so I'm not advocating for just wholesale build it all in South Korea, but maybe certain ship types, again, non-combatants, auxiliary vessels, seems like a logical place to at least start the conversation and look at what Korea can bring to the table. Again, the MRO work is fantastic. I think that should be a starting point and something to build on.
I saw this gentleman's hand go up, and then Dr. Drapp next.
Hi, Carl Meyer from the National War College. Appreciate the time. Mike, I really have a question more or less directed at you, and as somebody as a novice kind of coming into this issue, right? I'm really curious historically, I know you mentioned you didn't want to talk about potential policy levers the United States could do to juice its own industrial capacity for shipbuilding, but what are some of those successful government policies within the ROC itself that has enabled such a vibrant and highly capable shipbuilding industry to kind of blossom there, right? I think it's a choice that South Korea had made to make it such a player in this industry. So what are some examples that the relationship between the government and industry there that makes it so successful?
Yeah, I'm going to be candid. My expertise does not lie in the history of the Republic of Korea's shipbuilding industry. I think KEI has resources where they'll be able to bring in some folks that can speak to that much more eloquently than I can. I think from a processes perspective, a lot of it comes down to work weight and production rate. Again, built out over years, decades. If you're building 40 ships a year versus a ship a year or 2 ships a year or no ships a year averaged out over multiple years, you just don't have the same kind of accrual of expertise within your workforce. When our engineers first got on Philly Shipyard, they already think there's a 30 to 40% efficiency increase just from welding techniques and things that are standard over in our yard in Okpo. And so I can comment on that. In terms of ROC government policies over the decades, that I'll leave to an expert that can speak to it better than I can.
I saw Dr. Trett's hand go up.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, I'm Darcy Drow. I'm Fellow for Korea Studies at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I'm doing some work on Korean industrial policy across multiple domains, and the shipbuilding industry particularly, and how it's managing the U.S.-ROC relationship is really an interesting one. And something that I'm pondering over in my research right now, and was hoping especially you, Michael, could comment on, is something that's been touched on already, and that's after price and the regulatory environment or the policy environment. The real problem in the United States is labor and workforce development. And that's something that I think, that's a longer term problem.
Yes.
What is something that Hanwha is working on in building with Philly, or more broadly? Right now, I read in Fortune this morning that we have 4 million in the United States, 4 million Gen Z not in employment, education, or training. So we have a really big workforce development problem here too. So is there something that's like lessons learned from the Korean case? The training is involved. Who is doing the building of these ships?
Yeah, I can speak to one thing I think we immediately identified as a way we can potentially help with that at Philly, and maybe if it works there beyond. And then broader, the industry, to be honest, not shipbuilding, defense-wide industry workforce challenge. One of the first things we realized when we came over, when it comes to workforce in the United States, a huge bottleneck is actually instructors. If Bill is an amazing welder, you need Bill welding. Not teaching the next generation of welders. And if you do that, you build that up over time, years and years, 10, 20, 30 years, you start to, you have a problem because you're taking short-sighted in order to maximize production today. And so one of the things we were already in the process of starting is we have a couple hundred retiring production workers per year at our Okpo yard. And not to come here and do production work, but to come over on short-term 3, 6, 9-month visas to act as instructors. And then the other side of it is just flat out investment. At Philly, for example, they had a hall that does both blasting and painting, and that's a bottleneck. And you can only train so many people if you have them you can alternate between training them on how to do the blasting work, how to do the painting work. And so we're immediately looking at investing in smaller, which is the model in Korea, paired blasting and painting halls, usually in pods of 3. I think it's 2 blasting halls to 1 painting hall. And these are small things on the margins that I think can help with workforce. More broadly, I think you kind of pointed to a cultural issue, which is the United States is facing a blue-collar workforce shortage issue. It did not come out of nowhere. I'm of the generation where you were told a 4-year college degree was a requisite to being a valuable human being. And I think culturally, we have to get back to telling folks that there are career paths that pay well, that can support a family in the blue-collar workforce. And it's not, I can speak anecdotally, I have cousins that are 10 years younger than me that are making $95,000 a year as machine repairmen in upstate New York, which is not an area of extreme economic abundance. And that's the opportunity that exists if as a people and as a government, we can go in and culturally convince folks that this is a viable career path. It's not just a job, it's a career that can sustain you. And I had the opportunity in my previous job to kind of tackle these challenges, and one of the big ones we realized is junior, senior year of high school is too late. You have to go in middle school. And so one of the things that we're doing at Hanwha is working on building out community engagement within the broader SEPA region, but also New Jersey and Delaware, We want to make this a kind of a Delaware River, Mid-Atlantic story and bring in as much as we can and go engage folks when they're making those decisions, or even when they don't realize they're making a decision, but they're being subconsciously impacted and what their career path is going to be, and talk to them about the career that they could have in shipbuilding, but also in our other areas, whether it's munitions or artillery. And I think that is something the industry, all of industry, shipbuilding, the defense industrial base, but also a variety of commercial industries has to play a role in, as well as the U.S. government.
Right back, actually, just to stay at this column, I saw Mr. G's hand go up right there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Jae Hyung. I'm formerly at KEI and currently at the Special Competitive Studies Project. Given increasing discussions on integrating advanced or emerging technologies into manufacturing, various manufacturing sectors, how has that affected the calculus between U.S. government, Hanwha, and other stakeholders? I'm saying this because there's been discussions about the future shipyard project between Hyundai and Palantir. Also, Saronic announced a $400 million investment in its Port Alpha autonomous shipyard. So how has that affected Hanwha's calculations and its next steps?
Not significantly, in the sense that we have a plan for how I think we can incorporate our technologies and what we can bring to Philly Shipyard. We have had, I think, early discussions with the USG and the maritime industrial base on what that might look like for spreading that out to the broader shipbuilding ecosystem. We look forward, again, to those partnerships that we think can exist between industry, not just with Hanwha, but between Hyundai and Palantir and the ambitious project down in Texas. But it's an all of the above strategy. And I think particularly an area where that could really benefit from, call it AI, call it machine learning, is shipyard technology. I think a lot of times we focus on-ship technologies, new engines, better hull material, thinner steel, so on and whatnot, weapons capabilities. But the shipyard technology, I had the opportunity to visit our yard in Okpo in September. And when you step on, you enter what looks like this Star Trek bridge of a command center, and everything is geotagged, and you have just small efficiencies that add up when you're talking about building a ship that is 600, 700, 800, 900 feet long, and you know where everything is. You're not losing supplies for days at a time. Your layout is built in a way assisted with machine learning and design to absolutely maximize flow throughout the yard. Those are areas that I think, given the right incentive structure, where the USG is pushing or requiring U.S. shipyards to meet some of those efficiencies, there's a lot of potential for cooperation and for integrating that into the U.S. shipbuilding industry.
I saw a hand way back in the gentleman in the back there.
Thank you. I'm KH from the Korean Embassy in the public relations, public diplomacy section. We've been talking about economic rationale, strategic rationale behind this project. However, from the standpoint of public relations or public diplomacy, I wonder if there would be a good line, PR line, to talk, to appeal to the ordinary public of the U.S., the citizens, because in the end that matters, given the constituents and all the ordinary U.S. citizens, they have to support this idea at the end. And when you actually I've given some thought about it, and I have come up with something like, in the military, for example, back in Korea, when we talk about the combined posture between the U.S. Army military and Korean military, we always say, let's go together. We go together. It's simple, but it works. We've been saying that for the last decades. If we can come up with something like that, for example, something as simple as, we sail together, let's sail together. I think if you have any ideas, you can always reach out to me. Yeah.
I'll just say I defer on that to my communications colleagues, not my area of expertise, but what I'll say for Hanwha, 7,000 jobs in northern Georgia, in Dalton and Cartersville. That's what we can do together. Jobs that would not have existed otherwise. That's part of our Q-Cell solar manufacturing company down in northern Georgia. That is what Hanwha is looking to bring to the United States. We want to create shared economic prosperity, both for us as a company, but obviously for our workforce. And we'll continue to invest in our workforces, be it in Georgia, be it in Philly, or any future endeavors we have in the United States. And we think there's a lot of possibility for cooperation, and again, that shared economic prosperity.
All right, that lifts all boats. I believe I saw a gentleman right in the front with the glasses here.
Hi, Andrew Lee. I'm also from the National War College.
Just to expand a little bit on the labor question, I was wondering if you could speak a bit as far as Hanwha's approach in terms of laying out the groundwork for this investment, how you approach labor, USW, MTC, and other shipbuilding-related labor unions. And then for both of you, as a broader question, what do you see the role of unions as in a future approach to improving U.S. shipbuilding?
I'll start with the Hanwha perspective. For everyone's awareness, there's an amalgamated union that holds the contract at Philly Shipyard. I'm not an expert on which yards in the U.S. are unionized or not, but I think we're one of the few that are. And we have had, the yard has never had a strike or a walkout. They've had positive labor relations. We met with the union after we announced the acquisition, and we made it clear that we planned on honoring the CBA. I think the shipbuilding workforce writ large is kind of in a unique place compared to a lot of workforces in the United States, in the sense that we need more of them. We're not in a situation where automation or robotics is a dirty word when we start to have that conversation. And particularly given our approach has been, look, we are looking to invest, create more work, and bring on more workers. That is a good baseline or base to build a relationship on. I don't expect any challenges there, although there's always tension between management and workforce. But again, Hanwha as a company, we believe in investing in our workforce. We believe in creating not jobs, but careers. And we think that's necessary for shipbuilding. Colin talked to you about it earlier. Why sweat in the summer and freeze in the winter and do welding if you're making $1.50 more than a job that's in air conditioning? And so it is partially on industry with the support of government to help make that decision point a little easier for the workforce and to grow it. And kind of on my answer earlier, that is going to take a whole of industry. It's not a single cause with a single solution. It is multi-causal, and we're going to require a lot of different solutions, from a cultural approach to blue-collar workforce to investing in apprenticeship programs. I can say that the apprenticeship program at Philly, and I'll end with this, was 50 the year before, last year. It is 80 planning to be this year, and 120 in the following year. We're looking to see 50% increases in that apprenticeship program year over year for the next couple of years. And that comes with investment, that comes with bringing over those instructors I mentioned, and just making it a priority. It's a hard problem, workforce, but it's not intractable, and it's going to take some time, but we do see a path through.
I haven't done any research into the role of unions in U.S. shipbuilding performance, so I'm reluctant to comment.
That's fair. I think we have time for just one short question. This gentleman in the front here.
David Catterall, also from the National War College. We've talked a lot about how shipbuilding production domestically will take a long time. There are urgent needs for naval capacity. Filling that gap, producing ships in Korea, much of the domestic shipbuilding lobby has blocked efforts to build LNG, icebreakers, et cetera. Do you see a path to gaining support from the domestic industry for a short-term building agreement in Korea?
I think that there's a possible path forward, say, on icebreakers. Of course, we have the Polar Security Program in the United States. Supposed to have the first icebreaker delivered in 2024, and now I think 2030, 2031 is the earliest projection. I think the path forward, perhaps a deal that could actually get some holes in the water while also satisfying U.S. shipyards, is, say you build the first two ships in Finland in the case of icebreakers, and you bring over U.S. personnel to train them on it, and then subsequent hulls can be built in the U.S. once they get up to speed. You can also do, I think Secretary of the Navy Del Toro floated the possibility of building building at least big sections of the hull, say overseas, and doing the outfitting work in the U.S. So finding some solutions that incorporate, harness the expertise and capabilities of our allies while also generating work for U.S. shipyards. So maybe those are some of the more realistic paths forward on some of those vessel types.
I'll leave the Navy side to the USG and internal policy making. What I'll say is, we didn't get into it, and maybe we can dig into this more in a follow-up, is the strategic commercial fleet does, I think, acknowledge this challenge with a need for immediate capacity. And so one of the, I think, creative solutions they have there is they do have this interim foreign vessel designation that you're allowed to enter a foreign vessel into the fleet if it is accompanied by a commitment to produce in the United States to replace it. And I think that's along the lines of some of what Colin was just alluding to, the specifics of that for Navy versus commercial. Again, I think that is a political and USG decision that needs to be made, and I'll leave that to them and to Congress. But there are paths forward if the U.S. decides they need a need met in the immediate vicinity in terms of time now. I think there are creative solutions to get at it.
Well, we could keep going, but unfortunately it's just about time. We will bring this conversation to a close, but to which your point, Michael, I mean, it's a silver line being we're able to save some material for future conversations, for future events and publications. Speaking of future content, you'll find our next installment of Eye on Korea following our episode with Captain Steve Brock on our YouTube channel, this time featuring former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Commerce Don Graves. For those of you based in DC or following us online, we hope to see you again next Monday for a launch event on a report on the U.S. ROK Alliance and the Taiwan contingency, which is authored by our fellow and Director of Academic Affairs, Dr. Clint Work. Please RSVP under the Events tab on our website at keia.org, which you will also find a recording of this event. Please join me in giving a round of applause for our two esteemed guests. And we'll see you again next week.